What if a simple three-digit number carried a story that runs across centuries? What if that code shows up in art, rumors, and popular talk, always pulling attention? Today, we dig into the famous 666. No panic, no hype, just history, context, and questions to think about calmly. This will be a clear, direct read with a youthful tone. In the book we call Revelation, there's a short phrase that mentions a number of the beast. Tradition records it as 666, and that's where the mystery starts. The verse sits inside a chapter full of symbols and images, and the text itself asks for wisdom before you try to interpret science. It's not a technical manual, but part of a prophetic, symbolic piece of writing. Reading the verse alone is like taking one brushstroke out of a large painting. It works best in context. Revelation 13 sketches powers, symbols of authority, and signs of loyalty. The writer uses animals and exaggerated figures to show alliances and political structures. In that setting, the idea of a number that identifies a certain type of loyalty makes sense, a symbolic way to mark social and political choices of the time. In the ancient world, letters and numbers were often linked. In Hebrew and Greek, for example, letters also had numeric values, and that shaped everyday reading practices. Turning words into numbers allowed people to make pointed comments without naming names, or to hide meanings in plain sight for educated readers. This practice was common and practical. It helps us see why a number could carry so much information. Gematria is just a fancy name for adding up letter values. Each letter corresponds to a number. You add them and get a total. It's like turning a word into a numeric code you can recognize. Today, we use codes and IDs. Back then, Gematria did some of that same mnemonic and interpretive work. Imagine adding up the letters of a ruler's name and getting a number that circulates among learned readers. That number becomes a label, enough to signal who's being criticized or pointed at. It's a pragmatic device, not magic, that allowed criticism to pass in environments where open dissent could be risky. Seeing it this way changes things. The number stops being an occult riddle and becomes a literary technique. Why repeat the number 6 3 times? In biblical symbolism, 7 often stands for completeness. 6, by contrast, can suggest something incomplete or flawed. Repeating 6 3 times acts as a literary emphatic. It's like underlining a point. In plain words, it signals imperfection turned up to 11, or a repeated pattern of falling short. Not all manuscripts agree. Some early papyri and copies record 616 instead of 666. That has a technical explanation. Differences in spelling, how names were transcribed between languages, and local copying habits could change the numbers. Finding 616 in certain textual traditions reminds us the text was handed down by many hands across regions and times. Why does 616 show up? Depending on the alphabet and how you transliterate a name, the total shifts. So 616 can arise from another way of spelling or pronouncing the same referent in a different language. The existence of both numbers shows that any interpretation depends on how you translate and which manuscript tradition you follow. It isn't a simple matter of right or wrong. When the text mentions a mark, think less of a literal stamp and more of a symbol of loyalty. A mark can mean a practical choice, adopting values, following routines that shape identity, or joining systems that reward conformity. It's a striking image for reflecting on commitment, social pressure, and how belonging gets signaled. There are literal readings and symbolic readings. A balanced approach recognizes that prophetic writing uses strong images to prompt ethical reflection. Sometimes a literal image points to a social reality. Other times it's a metaphor for moral choice. The key is not to confuse the map for the territory. Across eras, 666 has been reinterpreted. It's been tied to first-century rulers, medieval political events, modern cultural symbols, and more recently, techno-paranoia. With each reinterpretation, the number acts like a mirror reflecting the fears and language of the interpreter. more than a single fixed truth. The danger of alarmism is real. Turning the number into an object of obsessive hunting shifts the focus away from serious analysis. When the goal becomes find the sign everywhere, the historical method and careful study are lost. The biblical text, read responsibly, invites discernment and informed debate, not sensational treasure hunts. So what's relevant today? Where do we put our trust? In conveniences, institutions, consumption habits, or shortcuts that make life easier? The text can push us to examine small daily compromises, accepting ethical shortcuts for short-term gain, or adapting behaviors to fit systems that slowly change who we are. Think of an offer that promises a quick fix and requests a small tweak in return, signing something without reading it, normalizing a minor lie to keep face, or choosing practices that pull you away from previously held values. Those repeated choices shape identity over time. Saying no to easy shortcuts is a practical way to resist the mark. 3 questions for self-check. When do you accept shortcuts for convenience? Which conveniences today carry moral costs for tomorrow? Where do you need clearer limits? Reflect honestly. That's how a community learns and improves. What 666 and 616 together show is the value of careful reading. This isn't about superstition, but about method and ethical questioning. The numbers point to human choices and the history of how the text was transmitted. Dropping the fetish around digits and focusing on context helps clarify authorial aims, historical reactions, and practical lessons for now. In synthesis, 666 and its variant 616 functions as a literary device and historical marker, not a talisman. Their differences reveal transmission processes, interpretive strategies like Gematria, and the anxieties of different ages. And rather than stoking fear, studying these figures gives a critical lens to see how collective choices in power structures were encoded in the text.